This is the Business, Innovation and Technology podcast. We have an extraordinary two-part episode for you today. Our own Jessica Liao, manager of the Solutions Engineering R&D team here at Facebook, interviewed a panel of three incredible guests. This panel had initially come together for a fireside chat about innovation, and just like the fireside chat, their insight and banter were too engaging to be contained. I'm Jordan Rogers-Smith, and I'd like to welcome you to the show. This episode is titled Innovation and Entrepreneurship, Part 1.
So innovation is as crucial as it is difficult to describe. And there are many different types of innovations that companies do in order to grow. Yet for a concept so broad and subjective, the pressure to innovate continues to grow. The purpose of this podcast is to contextualize innovation and entrepreneurship in a tangible way to fuel the next stage of growth for a company. My name is Jess, and I'm a manager on the Solutions Engineering Applied Research and Development team here at Facebook. And I am so humbled and honored to moderate a talented pool of serial entrepreneurs and innovative leaders here at Facebook. Before we begin, I ask that each panelist give us a 30-second TLDR on your work history and your role at Facebook.
Sweet. I take it I'm the first one here. Thank you for hosting us today, Jess. My name is Bruce Hazan. I've been at Facebook for about 10 years. I lead the business innovation organization within Facebook. And prior to joining Facebook, I launched a couple of ventures, some more successful than others. But the last company I launched was in the consumer space around daily deals, similar to what other may remember of the days of 2010, 2011, the rush for daily deals and some of the companies that marked that space. And so after that, joined Facebook originally in our London offices, and then just recently relocated over to the West Coast. And this is me passing the hot potato to Miku.
Thanks, Bruce, and thanks, Jess. I'm Miku Jha. I'm fairly new at Facebook. I think I'm on to my third month here, which is pretty exciting. I lead applied research and development and business messaging under Business Innovation Group. And prior to this, I've had a pretty crazy history of founding and starting and running 7 different startups. Some of them didn't do well, some of them did okay, some of them did well, but hopefully from each and every one of them, I had fundamentally a different learning, which I can share. And very, very excited to be here with everyone.
7 startups. That's almost like obsessive entrepreneurship.
Or foolish.
Well, it's awesome. Thank you very much, Miku. And thank you, Jess, for putting this together. So this is Tarin Ziyaee. And yeah, my background, I started my career actually doing a lot of defense work on the East Coast for the U.S. Army and the U.S. Navy, working on a whole bunch of like advanced algorithms for perception, see-through wall radars, perception underwater for nuclear submarines and things like that. I had my own company as well, working with the NIH, where we did spike sorting, and we tried to like reverse engineer how the brain of macaque monkeys actually process vision, which is really cool. And I can tell you, monkeys, the macaque monkeys are they're more like us than we like to imagine. That's a different story. And then I entered into the autonomous space, autonomous vehicle space. And I was working with Apple. I was also CTO of Voyage, and also then joined Control Labs at some point, I think 2018. And we after that got acquired by Facebook. So here we are. Here I am. Right now, I lead a small team in algorithm design for Central Fusion within Agios here in FRL, and I'm also an angel investor within the deep tech space over here in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. So, thank you.
We have Bruce.
Whoa.
He's an angel investor, right? We have 2 angels in this panel.
Yeah, but
you're not also an angel investor in grading strawberries and such? All right. Amazing. We've got
we should compare
monkeys.
Deals at some point, Bruce. Then
yeah, we should exchange notes. I was gonna say, you give me a good one, I'll give you another.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a family. Yeah.
Cool. All sorts of ideas and great problems and stuff. How do you go about in identifying the problems that are worth solving?
I can probably kick off with that one. It's funny. So I've been on the job for about 10 years now. Obviously, the scope of the job has evolved and changed. So the job that I started 10 years ago is very different from the job that I'm doing today. And the nature of the conversations I'm having with people and partners and clients is very different. But the best job, I think the constant for me on the job, the best moments I've had the job, the best days I've had on the job have been the ones that I've spent talking to customers. And developers and partners out there. Oftentimes these conversations kick off with hey, we want to build this. How can you help us achieve that? And sometimes conversations go down this route. But oftentimes what I have found is when you start asking these companies, these are huge companies, but at times they're also small developers in their bedrooms or their garage. And you start asking them, why do you want to build this? That to me is the substance that you get to. And the best insights that I've been able to get exposure to over the past decade is people telling you about the ambitions they have for their business, what they're trying to achieve, how they want to grow, and the impact that they want to have on the world. And so when they start sharing that, you can start relating to what they're trying to achieve, the impact that they want to have on the world, and so on. And to me, I've always been more interested in hearing about problems than ideas, because at Facebook we have very creative people. God knows our teams are made up of very brilliant individual minds, and so I don't ever foresee a world where we can't solve a challenge or a problem. But getting to a point where we actually talk about problems that are going to be meaningful, not just to one or two or three clients around the world, but hundreds of thousands and millions of entrepreneurs, small and medium businesses, large organizations, that's actually quite hard. And so to me, I think identifying problems worth solving often starts with talking to end clients or developers and hearing, their view of the world. And if we're able to reconcile the way they look at the world and where we're at, I think that's where value is being created. So, that's been the constant in my job day in since the first day. And just up until a few weeks ago, talking to a small and medium business here in Los Angeles, selling mid-century furniture, and hearing about, how they're selling online. They have a huge factory, and yet their biggest vector for sales today is selling online. And so fascinating to hear about these insights that at the surface may not seem like much, but yet translate needs that many clients and organizations around the world have.
And it's really amazing, Bruce, what you have shared, because what you have picked up intuitively, it took me 3 startups to get to that conclusion. Initially, when I used to think of an idea, it was just one thing, how cool it is on my own coolness scale. And then I'll go ahead and build it. And if it's so awesome, why wouldn't they take it, right? After 3, I realized I had to change my approach. Went back to do the business school, assuming that I'd learn something there. I didn't really learn much. So then I did another one. But in the process now, I have to Bruce's point, I really understand how important it is to have that business centricity or customer centricity at the very early stage of what you're thinking and trying to do. And there's this notion, maybe more so in the Valley, that if I share this with business or partner or other entrepreneurs, they're going to steal my idea. Nobody wants to steal your idea. Everybody has their own idea. Go build it. No one wants to do what you want to do because they are obsessed about something else. So that was a big misnomer on why I wouldn't vet and validate in my early phases. So I changed that. Overall, I think there are 2 aspects now which I kind of hold it as a goal when I'm thinking of something. One is, how big is the problem, right? Are we really impacting millions and billions of people or a certain aspect in a positive way? Because if it is big enough, then even if you deliver a small chunk, I think that's really, really meaningful. And second is it feasible to solve? Can you come up with a radical solution, some kind of projection that you can solve it? The best ideas are the ones where the problem is big enough, but at the same time, the technical feasibility lies somewhere between, yes, I can solve it, and it's a pure science fiction, right? So if you are somewhere on that gray scale, then I think those are truly the powerful ones, which I would, at least for me, I think that's how I would pick the problem spaces.
Yeah, it's awesome, Miku. I mean, yeah, and thanks, Bruce and Miku, for that. I think for me, how do you identify problems worth solving? I mean, man, that's a huge question. So I do want to echo what Bruce said, which is obviously, talk to your customer and figure out what is it that they want and what is it that they don't want, things like that, right? I think for me, really, there's also something that I might add to that, which is that, sometimes the customer can actually lead you astray, right? Sometimes the customers don't even know what they want, right? Or they think they know what they want via, for example, method A or method B or something like that, right? And I think that, especially coming perhaps from like deep tech, right? It's the challenge there I see is for deep tech leaders to understand what a new technology might open up, right? Before customers even do, before clients even do, because they're not familiar with the technology. And then to attach that to what customers are really after, right? Versus what they might say they're after, right? And I think one example of that might be the example that we sometimes, like what I'll talk about, Henry Ford, if you ask people, what is it that they want? They'd say that we want a faster horse, right? Well, okay, sure. They want to get places faster, but they might not care how do you do it. Matter of fact, it might be nice to do it without a horse. And hence that leads credence to something like a car, for example, right? So things of that nature, right? So I've always tried to sort of, make sure that I'm able to strike that balance, whether it's through investing, or whether it's through different startups where you say, hey, you know what? There's this new kind of piece of technology. It's interesting and it does these weird things. And I also have these people who have these problems today and they want them solved, but they might not know how to solve it. And let me try to make that connection for them, right? And I think that's how I try to get a beachhead within the space.
And just actually building on this one, I've also found that, oftentimes people talk about innovation in the sense of coming up with new ideas, and I'm sure we'll get to talk about it. But to me, I think oftentimes it's also taking existing ideas and doing a little bit of a patchwork together, and you come up with something new. And I think the same can be said about problems. I don't want to put Miku on the spot here, but her previous startup she had identified a problem on one specific industry. It turns out there was many other industries. And so there's also a beauty of taking a problem outside of its current context and reapplying it to, let's say, another industry, another time frame or anything like that. And all of a sudden you could be you could be sitting on something that is actually much more meaningful than it was in its original form, yet it is exactly the same problem. And so, I am fascinated about, to me, a lot of these things are always very cyclical. And so these new products and these new things that are being sold and, promoted to us are just a reinvention of a problem that has long existed before. It's just, been reinterpreted many, many times over.
I love it. I love it. So I see some themes over here, right? Like customer centricity, especially in the early stages, like really getting down to the why and such. I also see being able to strike the proper balance between some of the new tech today and the problems that occur. I think something that I realize is people kind of know what they want to feel. So even if we're able to take that problem outside of the current context, to your point, Bruce, is there a way we could reapply this in a different industry? Because people kind of know what they want to feel at the end of the day around that. So with that, what are some good ways or just basic steps that you use in order to develop these ideas into something fruitful?
And, it's interesting because I think about this a lot. Leading a large organization of, I would call them highly entrepreneurial engineers. It's an opportunity and a challenge at the same time. When you hire people who are technically very much capable, so they can build, they're very creative because they've been exposed to many different industries and so on. Ideas can somewhat turn into the wild, wild west if, they're not constrained by, what we're trying to solve for and so on. And I often see this thing where, we talk about over engineering and so on, but even just at the idea level, without even having thought about, even starting working on it, it's what is the core of an idea, and to me, oftentimes when I start talking about teams about what's an MVP, right? What's the minimum viable product? I think Miku told me the other day about the minimum lovable product, which I love, and I'm going to steal with pride going forward. But that's already on the solving phase. But, and there is this for our viewers who wouldn't have gathered this far. So in the episode, I'm originally French, and so there's this French writer who I very much like. He's called Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, and so he has this quote. He wrote this quote many decades ago, centuries ago. I would be tempted to say, which is that perfection is not achieved when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing more to remove, or so to say. And so I think the same could be applied to an idea. And what's the in the context of a company like Facebook operating at the scale that we're at, we could come up with an idea and, many other ideas that surround the idea that, in our own perception makes the idea better and so on. But then, what is the core of the idea, the one that's going to help us identify if we're onto something? And so oftentimes I encourage my teams to think about, take that idea that is not yet fully formed, but that you think is really going to be making the difference for what it is that we're trying to solve. And can we try to validate this without it taking us too many cycles to validate and go and build and whatnot? I think the times where we've been the most successful is when we had an opportunity to validate an idea within a quarter or a half. Of course, project may, take much longer to kind of turn, come to life, so to speak. But just identifying that idea, like what is the core of what we're trying to prove, to validate, without really adding too many layers onto the core idea, so to speak. And so, to me, I love very simple ideas. There's something about simple ideas that I found brilliant. And in the decade that I've spent at Facebook, the project and the initiatives that I'm the most proud of, the ones that I know have had the greatest impact in the world between people and businesses, are found ideas that were actually really, really simple at the start. And so they ultimately may have evolved over time to something a little bit more complex. They may have had very technical execution, but the ideas that we're trying to solve for were very simple. So maybe I'm a little bit old school on that one, but I love simple ideas.
No, thanks for sharing that, Bruce. I think for me, I have so many hard learnings in terms of, what do you do when you have the bug initially? First thing is that, can you fall in love with the problem as opposed to the solution, right? Like, can you really obsess about the problem? Because if you obsess about the problem, then you have the flexibility to change the solution to solve the problem. But if it's the other way around, then you're going to force the solution onto the problem, right? Second thing is, we are always in the early stages a little bit shy about validating it in the real world. We go under the umbrella of, I need to build it a little bit more before it's ready for the customer or the partner. Going back to what we shared, this minimal viable product, it can be scrappy, half of things don't work, but we are always nervous and we keep building it some more. And I think that's wrong, because I think day zero is the best day to start in terms of getting as much feedback and validation as you can from the real world. The next one, which I did not do, hence it's a learning, is that you have to solve the hardest part of the problem first, as opposed to, incrementally adding the blocks and keeping that hard one for later, and then kind of reasserting in your mind that you're actually making progress. So for me, to drive by example, I had to twice in my career, I had to deal with building a full stack IoT device. And I don't have comfort for Internet of Things or for any kind of hardware. I have a very software driven background. So in both those scenarios, I kept putting off building that device, thinking that we could do it some other way. I was able to put everything together. I knew intuitively that I have to do it, but I didn't do it. And that just added so much to the timeline that it didn't result in success. And the last one is that this is really hard. We always hear it. It always sounds great when somebody else is going through it. to learn and embrace your failures. It just sounds like one of those things which, people talk about in panels, but when you personally have to go through it after investing 3 years or 4 years into something and it didn't pan out, it's very, very hard. But if we can harden that mindset to really learn from the failures, then I think we are setting ourselves up for the next one, which may be 10x bigger and better because you have already learned so many things on the way. So, none of us can actually come up with a recipe or a template because every idea, problem solution, everything is different to each its own. But there is a mindset, and that mindset can maybe just improve the odds of success. This is along the lines of sharing some of those mindsets.
Yeah, thanks, Miku. I actually love what you said about, fall in love with the problem, not the solution, right? Like that. I mean, that is gold, right? That's incredibly correct. And I think this can be applied to so many different avenues, right? But yeah, I mean, like, what are some basic steps? I mean, look, like, for me, to be honest, based on what I've seen, like, just over 20 years, I think the biggest thing, guys, is allowing people and allowing organizations to make U-turns, right? Like literally allowing U-turns, right? Because what I've seen is that more often than not, in the ideation phase, something gets locked in. People think, okay, we're going to invest in this and so. And then you figure out, because you're on the frontier, you don't know the answer. You know the question, but you might not know the answer. And things don't work out for reasons, because maybe the technology doesn't work out. Maybe the business model is not correct. That's fine. But what I've seen is a reluctance to make U-turns, right? And when we don't allow ourselves to make U-turns organizationally, individually, you kind of get stuck now with this zombie sort of entity in a sense, right? It's kind of like looking for problem solved, and it just eventually will die out because reality is gonna hit him, right? So one part of the process that I would love to see, as a society, that we sort of take on is, it's easy to come up with ideas. I have ideas, you have ideas, we all have ideas, right? But we should make sure that the processes there are such that they allow U-turns to happen, where in a week, in a month, in a quarter, for example, like Bruce mentioned, a quarter, yeah, great. Let's come back and be like, you know what? This is actually a huge mistake. This is why, right? Here's actually something else I think we should have done. Let's try that instead, right? And there should almost be like no sort of, like inertia for that, or, kind of thing, right? So that's perhaps one thing that I might add, right? As far as like developing the ideas, I think that like Bruce said, I think there's so many different ways you can tackle this. There's a deep tech idea, but sometimes you can just take something that currently exists and revisualize it for someone. Like if we're talking about something that's not deep tech, where the revisualization might make a huge difference towards having something be low friction or not, right? And I know a bunch of startups who work on that, for example, where they just take existing data and they just like revisualize it for you, and now patterns start to pop up and everything like that, and that's of like huge value. So I think that one thing that I've told folks in the in the past with different organizations, I say, if you have an idea, that's great. I know you're invested in it if you can be bothered to write one pager about it and really dig into it. And if you can't be bothered to do that, then it's probably not worth investing in. But if you can do that, and you're really kind of like hitting me over the head with and saying, here's something I think we should do, and here's why, then I think then you have my attention, right? So I might that's how I might start. But the U-turn is very important. We have to have the process for U-turns.
I love your U-turn point, because I remember in a completely different industry, one of the most successful hedge fund managers, probably universally, his quote when he was asked, why are you so successful? He said, I put my trade. The moment I think it's wrong, I take a U-turn and then double down and invest 10x in my position.
Yeah, that's right.
The only reason I'm successful because I'm the fastest to do a U-turn.
Because you adapted. Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
And it's funny talking about U-turns, because I think to be able to make a U-turn, you need to realize that you're not going in the right direction, right? And I think I think that's also something I wanted to add here is like, to take an idea and turn it into something tangible, you also need help and partners along the way that are going to help you validate the thing. And so we often talk about soundboards also, but it's almost, I have found, it's good to have this person who will poke holes in it in the most positive way, but we're not going to nod at you. Yeah, that's a wonderful idea. That's a great product, but also keep you, one, accountable about the problem, the idea you're trying to solve, but also that you're actually in the process of turning it into something. And then also have the honesty to tell you, hey man, this is not going anywhere. Time to make a U-turn, right? Or a pivot. And so I think oftentimes I have seen that to be a creativity killer, to the solitude, the fortress of solitude almost, is like you and your ideas, and being stuck on that, I have found to be the ultimate ideation killer in entrepreneurship. And so, building the relationships and partnerships along the way is crucial.
The conversation continues in part 2 when Jess asks,
how do you translate your entrepreneur ideas to like a big company like Facebook? So Facebook's got its goals, it's got its missions and such. How do you drive such a big vehicle in the direction of your ideas?